Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're glad that you could spend some time with us for today's webinar. My name is Erin Bremer. I'm a graduate institute for the Zaire Institute, or a graduate assistant, and I will be briefly going over our agenda for the next hour and a half before I pass things over to our host for today, Demointe Wesley. First, Demointe is going to introduce our guest speakers, who will share a little bit about themselves and our topic for today. All of our speakers will do their best to communicate such that all you viewers can follow along, but please comment in the comment section of whatever platform you're using if you're having any difficulty with the speed of our guests' conversation or understanding. Following their conversation, there will be some time for questions from you all and answers, which will be moderated by our host. Then once the Q&A portion has concluded, I will hop back on to share a few announcements related to the Zaire Institute and upcoming events. If you are unable to stay until the end of our time together, there will be a recording of this webinar posted on the Zaire Institute's website and YouTube channel by early next week if you would like to return to it or share it with others. Thank you so much and enjoy. Take it away, Demointe.
Thank you so much, Erin, and welcome everyone to this exciting conversation. I'm Demointe Wesley, a graduate student with the Center for Justice and Peace Building and a volunteer with the Zaire Institute. I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panelists and taking us a bit through some of the Q&A at the end. So as Erin said, as you have questions, please drop them into the comment section of wherever you're watching from, and we will make sure to get to as many as possible towards the end of our time together. So first up, I would like to introduce you to Sheryl R. Wilson, who is the Executive Director of KIPCOR and has been a practitioner, trainer, and educator in restorative justice for 20 years, working with individuals, nonprofits, academic institutions, and public agencies from around the world. Her work in restorative justice has included facilitating restorative justice dialogues in various venues, working as a community mediator, and serving as a researcher. Her experience also includes teaching restorative justice courses at the college level, community outreach, victim offender dialogue, and defense-initiated victim outreach in capital cases. She is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, holding a restorative justice-based Master's of Liberal Studies degree, a Kansas State-approved mediator, and a past president of the Board of Directors of the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, or NACRJ, and serves by appointment on the Kansas Supreme Court's Advisory Council on Dispute Resolution. She also serves on the faculty of Bethel College. Welcome, Sheryl. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Mark Umbright, who is a professor emeritus and founding director of the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work. Mark serves on the faculty of the Center for Spirituality and Healing in the Academic Health Center at the University of Minnesota, teaching courses on peace building through mindfulness practice and forgiveness and healing. He is an internationally recognized practitioner and scholar with more than 40 years of experience as a facilitator of dialogue, peacemaker, trainer, teacher, researcher, and author of 12 books and more than 200 other publications in the fields of restorative justice, mediation, spirituality, forgiveness, and peacemaking. Over the past 3 decades, Dr. Umbright has provided consultation and conducted training seminars and lectures in 29 countries in Asia, Africa, Europe, the Mideast, and North and South America, and nearly every state of the US. As a practitioner, he periodically facilitates peace-building circles in the community and restorative dialogues between family survivors of homicide or other victims of severe violence and the offender in the quest for healing and strength. Over recent years, he has worked with colleagues in Brazil, Ireland, and Northern Ireland, Italy, Japan, Liberia, Israel, Palestine, and Taiwan on peace-building initiatives. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. And last but certainly not least, we have Joel Fries, who has served as executive director of NACRJ since January 2022. Prior to this, Joel oversaw a statewide restorative justice program for 13 years at a nonprofit agency in North Dakota and served on the NACRJ Board of Directors from 2017 to 2021. Joel has been involved with domestic violence and sexual assault advocacy for over a decade and served for 3 years as a facilitator for sexual assault prevention and advocacy for North Dakota State University. Joel completed the Reducing Racial and Ethnic Disparities in Juvenile Justice Certificate program at Georgetown University in 2016 as a part of his role with the North Dakota Juvenile Justice State Advisory Group. In 2020, Joel completed a year-long formation process to become an Associate of Sisters of the presentation, which binds together his longstanding regard for spirituality, justice, and peace. Joel received his bachelor's degree from North Dakota State University in Fargo and holds a master's degree in strategic leadership from University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota. A lifelong North Dakotan, Joel has resided in Fargo for over 25 years. Welcome, Joel. And again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Mark just to open us up, and then I'll be back at the end for Q&A. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, DeMonte. We're going to be showing you 3 different segments of a video on taming the ego, but I want to make a few comments before that. This is a very different type of workshop or seminar on restorative justice. This is not about cognitive understanding of the theory, the impact, the research. All of that's important to me, more in the background. I've been involved in lots of research over the years, but this is totally different. In my younger years, I would have had a harder time even talking about this stuff. But throughout my years of experience as a practitioner particularly, but also as a scholar and doing quite a bit of research, I've come to finally come to grips with the reality of the enormous probability, despite our good intentions, my own, of having unintended negative consequences result from our activities. And most of us are unaware of it. I've not been aware of it because I always had good intent. But the more I was able to tame my ego, step back a little, listen, not try to explain or anything like that or get defensive, it's really been a humbling experience and a very enriching experience too. And taming the ego is about really getting beyond technique in any field. Restorative justice, other fields as well. There's always layers of advanced training, getting more and deeper training, which is important. And training overwhelmingly, understandably, focuses on learning new techniques or how to use different current techniques in a better, more effective way. Again, that's important, but I've learned to be careful because I've been witnessed and I've experienced, and I'm sure I've done this myself, get so much into focus on technique. Am I doing it right? Am I following, some RJ programs even have a script. You got to go say it this way. If you get so focused on that, the energy beneath your communication, beneath your words, does not put people at ease. It communicates at times even a judgmental, even a patronizing attitude at times, not because we're intending to. So, actually we toyed with the idea of calling this workshop Beyond Technique, which is what I've done in a number of other places, but we really wanted to reframe it as Taming the Ego. This is a very different perspective. And to me, it's very important. And realize what I'm saying, it's not instead of technique, it's beyond techniques. We need to learn the initial techniques and learn other ones as we go along. But boy, techniques can get in the way. They can block the natural healing flow of story. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Let's get into this video. We're going to show it in 3 segments and be with you in a little while, and we'll get a little discussion of that. And then Sheryl will help carry the next section, and then Joel. And then we'll see you at the end with questions and answers. As restorative justice has developed from the margins in the 1970s into the mainstream, not totally mainstream, But today, restorative justice truly is a global movement in well over 67 countries, as the United Nations has found. And as restorative justice has developed over all these decades, there's been more and more levels and layers of training, and a lot of, quote, advanced training. And advanced training in restorative justice in any field typically, overwhelmingly, deals with learning more advanced techniques, ways of doing what you're supposed to do. Well, I'm here today to offer a very different perspective on advanced training, something I've learned over the years and learned from looking back and reflecting on my own limitations, as well as whatever good I've done over the years, and as I've learned from just feedback from people I've listened to. This is a very different take on advanced training. It draws upon bits of indigenous wisdom that I've been blessed to have been exposed to over the decades, and I want to share with you with permission that's been given to me. One is a statement from an Onondaga elder from Indian country that I learned many, many years ago, when he spoke of how a good chief has a good mind and a good heart. A good mind without the balance of the heart, you can become like a shark. And that's so characteristic of Western culture. All up here, you're like a shark trying to manipulate things. Even if it's out of good intention in restorative justice, you can still be in more of that shark mode. However, a good mind without the balance of the heart, if it's all focused on just the heart, you can become ineffectual. It can be a very warm, wonderful place to be, very comfortable in contemplative practice or focused on deeper healing. But you can become ineffectual. You can close yourself off to the suffering that's not just in other parts of the world, but across the street in your own city. And this Onondaga elder spoke of how a good chief has the balance of both. We don't use the full capacity of our minds. Minds are important. But our culture, and particularly so much of our teaching and learning, is geared to just pumping more facts up here and techniques, where learning to work with the energy of our spirit and of our heart, that's just supremely important as well. Another bit of wisdom that I learned many years ago, it's the core principle of Native Hawaiian emotional, spiritual, and physical healing. It's called Pa'akawaha. It means be still, close the mouth. And that is remarkably similar in a different cultural context for those who come from a Judeo-Christian background. In the scriptures, several times where it's mentioned, be still and know I am God. Be still, feel the presence of God. So that whole notion of slowing down, taming, I could echo this in many other settings from Taoism, Buddhism. I don't have time to go into that. The point is, we have been given creator-given gifts of working with our breath and silence, and stillness, that do not take formal Western advanced training courses, 40-hour courses, long courses of other things. All of that stuff's helpful. But all of the techniques and the focus on the cognitive stuff can get in the way, frankly. For me, over the years, and this is not where I began decades ago, but for me, all of that's important, but it's in the background. It's more important that I tame my mind, slow down, and fully present.
It was really good to be reminded of those things, Mark. I've heard you share those things many times in trainings and classes, and it just brought me back to the place where I just remember the importance of knowing that the process, we say trust the process, we say it all the time, but really, truly, if we don't have that energy of trusting the process, there's no way that the people we're working with are going to feel that trust. And so for me, I just know I have to ground myself constantly and just remembering a few things. And one of the things that I tell myself when I am in that space of knowing that the people that I'm working with, this is super, like, one of the most major conversations they're probably going to have, either in their lives or in that moment for them. And I don't want to wreck it by being somewhere else. So for me, I say to myself, I really try to get myself in that space of thinking, this is bigger than me. This is greater than me. It's not about me. I want to elevate whatever is being said on either side as much as possible, put that in the forefront and take me out of that. And so part of that mantra is remembering this is not for me, about me, it's bigger than me. So those are the things that play in my mind. That's the tape that's running in my mind when I'm preparing to facilitate a dialogue. And that is my way of taming my ego, getting my mind right, all of those things. Joel, I'd just like to pass it on to you to hear from you about your thoughts in this moment.
Yes. Like Mark and Sheryl, the way my facilitation style has evolved over the past 19 years. I was originally trained as a restorative conferencing facilitator in 2005, so almost 19 years ago. And I was trained by a wonderful curriculum from Minnesota Department of Corrections. And it did contain some of those things that Mark spoke about, a script. And I honestly still have that script sort of embedded in my head today. But what has changed over the years is that I'm very flexible with it now, and I go with what is happening in the moment, and I'm more responsive than I maybe was 20 years ago. My entry point into restorative justice was trained as a facilitator. A few years later in 2008, I came across Circle process. And Circle was such a beautiful thing, and I'm so grateful that I learned both processes early on, because Circle was one of those things that helped me slow down. It helped me let go of control of the process, and I think it made me a better conferencing facilitator. Over the years, I've had a wonderful team with our program in North Dakota, processing through cases. I mean, one of the beautiful things about restorative conferencing is that every situation is different. Every situation is different. So being able to process that with people and learn from each other has been a huge assistance. And also getting to work with our 5 tribal nations in North Dakota over the past 19 years has had a huge influence on me, and teaching me not just to pay attention to the clock, the time, but that we live in this moment of relationship and building trust and all of those things. So those are some of the things that have influenced me over the past 19 years.
Mark, is there anything you'd want to add in this moment that you didn't say on the video, perhaps?
Well, something that comes to mind when I teach my graduate students at the university, or the trainings I've done with practitioners over the years. Not in the beginning, I didn't do this, but in the last 20 years I have. I literally, in order to put people at ease, because everyone's a little nervous, when they first come into a training or new class, I literally say, be at peace. Don't worry if you screw up. I might screw up. It's more important that you are present and relaxed and feel comfortable and open to hearing and feeling the energy of others. You can always correct something if you forget it. And I make it clear, I don't want you to screw up. I don't want to screw up. But I'm not here to say you need to do it exactly this way. I want to, creating a safe place for people in training and ultimately for people in the actual interaction is supremely important. So.
One of the pieces of advice, and this maybe came from you, Mark, a long time ago, but I've always lived by the mantra that the best restorative process, like the best conference, when you bring parties together, the best process is where the facilitator speaks the least.
Mhm.
And that's always been one of my guiding principles. And so one of the things I've learned is what enables me to work with the energy of the parties in that conference is really about the preparation that I do with the parties in the pre-process, that we're building trust and we're getting to know each other, and we know how to be in sync with one another when we get to that restorative conference. And that allows us as the facilitator to back off a little bit. And one other important component that I remember, even though I try to, remove myself from the process as much as possible, it doesn't mean that as a facilitator, when I'm in that moment, I'm gazing out the window or I'm daydreaming. I am very attentive and aware of everything that is going on. If there's the slightest eye roll or shift in body movement, then I'll know that I need to be maybe guide more. But otherwise, the parties lead the process, of course. So, yeah.
Well
Yeah.
stated.
I'm glad you brought that up. I remember one of my teachers early on, Mark will remember Carolyn McLeod in Washington County. She ran a community restorative justice program, and that's where I cut my teeth on my first cases. She taught me how to observe all of the participants in a particular process, that was my job, not just to sit there and kind of zone out, but really to watch body movement and to just make sure people were feeling safe based on the way that they were presenting. And I've never forgotten those things. 20 some years later, I'm still, that's what I try to do. And then lastly, I think, the more I do circle process, the better I am at facilitating anything, because I understand that whole idea of how we bring people together in circle. We have to have that moment where we have that mindfulness time at the beginning of circle. And so I do mindfulness moments in everything that I do to shift the energy, because we know otherwise the busyness of whatever is happening in our day can play into the next thing. And so I certainly don't want that to happen when I'm, again, working with people who are having a very, very important conversation. So you were going to say something, Mark, it looked like?
One thing that just came to my mind, I haven't thought of this for a while. One of the things I've learned, both from my practice over the years and the research I've done in many states and some other countries, and I hope this comes across so it's understandable. I firmly believe people who come to us to help with a restorative intervention, they don't need us as much as we think they need us. This is directly related to taming the ego. They don't. They need to set a safe tone, to feel comfortable with us, and they need us to get out of the way so that their strength, their resilience can emerge. And that really requires a lot of mindfulness, because I guarantee you at different points in facilitating a circle or a conference, whatever, there'll be moments as a facilitator, you don't want to say, but have you given thought to this, or here, you want to impart some of your words. And I've learned over the years, when I get that urge, I will take a few deep breaths to quiet myself and be with silence, and they'll pick it up. And this is, what I'm sharing again is this is not some conceptual thing. This is stuff I've experienced. We as restorative justice facilitators, we all, including myself, we have the capacity to do harm, even though we have no intent. I have been in a restorative justice intervention, not as a facilitator, when I felt a certain level of being traumatized at the low level, not the high level. I have had highly experienced restorative justice facilitators in a community in Minnesota who came to me because they trusted me, and later said, Mark, we just went through another training, and this was by highly experienced national trainers in circles. And they said, we felt absolutely traumatized because of the way this was held. And I don't share these comments with people who are new to restorative justice. But for those of us who are in restorative justice and experience, this is the stuff we need to be aware of. Putting in a larger context, this is what Carl Jung, the late psychologist of the last century, spoke of the shadow effect. You know, we have a very difficult time of owning up to our shadow, our stuff, our judgmentalness, our anger, our hatred even. We project that out on others. And learning to come to grips with it and acknowledge it, not beat ourselves up, but acknowledge it, it tames it, it brings it down. It can teach us. Well, I hope that's a bit understandable, but it's, in the final analysis, you know, people who come to us as restorative justice practitioners, they're not coming to us to understand the theory of restorative justice or different techniques. They're coming to us because they want to talk openly among themselves in a place they feel safe and not judgmental. They don't want us mouthing off all the time. I've been in some facilitations with not myself facilitating, but where the facilitator, highly trained, is talking most of the time at a technical level, saying the right things, like what a textbook might say. But it totally blocked the flow of the natural energy of the story coming out. And again, I want to point out, I'm not saying this because I'm some expert in not doing that. No, quite the contrary. I've learned over the years that I too can do that. And the more aware that I can and have, the more I can keep it more under control and learn from it.
Well, we should jump back into the next segment of the video. So we'll go ahead and do that.
I want to highlight 5 key points. The first is breath work. Something we take for granted. You know, we typically, particularly in Western society, really breathe very shallow in our busyness, our nervousness, our anxiety. Learning to work with breath is powerful. The entire system of healing within Chinese culture is called Qigong. It means working with the energy of life. And it's all focused on working with breath. And again, I could mirror this in different traditions. Within Indian country, they would use different metaphors, but their ceremonies of the sweat lodge, vision quest, many other ceremonies. It's ways of learning to still the mind, be present, slow down, feel the enormous healing energy of nature and of creation. There's many ways of working with breath. If I was with you in person, I'd invite you to go through some brief centering. And brief centering is not full meditation. There are many, many benefits to full meditation that have actually been scientifically shown in terms of its impact. But centering, even for a minute or two, whenever you're mindful of the fact of being nervous in a situation of public speaking or working with a certain group of people or an individual or in your family or with a partner, when your buttons are getting pushed, learning to focus on breath, taking a deep breath, slow belly breathing, feeling your diaphragm expand, breathing in to the count of 8 or more as you're able to, slowly exhaling to the count of 8 or more. And as the mind wanders, which it always will, focus again on breath, or perhaps envision yourself in a beautiful place in nature that brings you peace. In traumatic situations I've been involved in personally, where I was almost killed because of an accident I was in. Had I not worked with my breath, I would have gone into deep shock. I went into partial shock. This was when I fell down 2 flights of stairs in Italy, stone stairs in the dark. And I could have easily broken my neck. And by being aware of what was happening at some level, even though I was sliding in and out of shock, and clearly breath and just breathing deeply, it kept me present and alive. So breath work is one. Second is relying on intuitive responses. Early in my career, 40 years ago or so, it's intuitive stuff. I like, come on, give me a break. Show me technique. I want to know how to do it. Well, that's changed a lot. Techniques, by the way, are important. What I'm speaking on is about going beyond technique, not instead of technique. Learning the basic techniques initially is important, but learning to move beyond them. Learning to work with the energy beneath the words, your words or the words of those you're working with. Sometimes the words we speak or the words others speak to us push our buttons, and that doesn't, really upsets us. But if you can tune into a more intuitive posture of trying to still your mind and be open to what you're feeling, what you're sensing, that even though these words sound nasty, that's not what you're feeling. You're feeling some kindness and openness beneath that. Learning to trust tuition is powerful. Third, pausing in silence in the process of facilitating any kind of restorative dialogue is extremely important. This is one of those creator-given gifts that we don't need 40 hours of training and a certificate to engage in. Learning to work with silence. And we can only come to embrace silence and pausing if we can still our mind, tame our egos. A fourth point, working with the energy of kind of negative energy. As you're feeling this negative energy, kind of what I was just alluding to, learning to work with that. And learning to work with it means many things. And part of it is learning to trust that negative energy coming out, not blocking it, not interrupting. When you feel negative energy coming out in a circle or a dialogue, and you feel your buttons getting pushed, and you feel this internal need that you need to intervene, you need to save this group process or this individual process, be careful. Take a few deep breaths and reflect on, why am I getting so upset about this? Is this my issue? Or is this what's really going on? I've long since learned that, say, in a circle process, the energy of communication can really be tense at times. But if I'm trying to feel the energy beneath the words being said, I'm really sensing that people need space. They need for you as a facilitator to pause. They need that toxic energy to flow out before the healing energy of story can really be engaged for all parties. And finally, the fifth point, getting out of the way. And this is a very practical thing, and I do mean getting out of the way, either emotionally or physically. Now, usually it means emotionally. You're in the middle of a victim offender conference or victim offender dialogue or a circle or a family conference, and you set up the process initially. You give a gentle opening statement, but you try to get people engaged directly with each other and get out of the way. I will oftentimes find myself scooting back on my chair a little, so I'm not quite as directly in the energetic flow of communication. So they're telling their stories to each other, or it's moving around the circle with the talking piece. And there was
Okay. So in that video clip, Mark highlighted 5 points. And Sheryl and I are going to share just a few reflections on situations we've worked with that speak to the points that Mark raises. Three of them really resonate with me. The first being breath work. About 8 years ago, I worked on a sexual assault case that had happened at a high school with a sports team. And there were about 12 parties involved. Some parties were the parties who caused the harm. Some were the families, the youth and families, the recipients of the harm. Out of all of the cases that I have worked with the past 19 years, that case probably held the most anger from all of the parties, from both sides. What I started doing, I don't remember if I did it before this moment, but what I started doing, I used to go into the bathroom at work before my meetings with the families, because I went in, I locked the door. I needed to be in a quiet space where I could, like Mark says in his video, like literally still myself, because I had to I felt that as a facilitator, I had to prep myself to navigate and receive some of this anger. The families were so angry with the system and with other things that have happened. And they weren't necessarily angry at me as the facilitator. But for those of us who are facilitators, we know that sometimes we are the person that is there to listen. So we do receive some of that anger. But I would go in, and I just made it a practice because I had to. I'm like, I have to calm myself and center myself before I go into these meetings. I have made that a practice since, and I also make it a practice before I make phone calls. For facilitators who work on juvenile court cases or other cases that involve many parties, you know that you are making a lot of phone calls to schedule, to follow up. And I found in that situation, even before I made phone calls to the families, I would be in a quiet space. I was not multitasking. I wasn't, in my vehicle. I needed to be calm and centered before I made those phone calls to those parties. So, if whenever I do pre-meetings or conferencing, I mean, if my meeting is at 2:30, I better build it into my practice that I need to be in a quiet space 15 minutes early to center myself. As a facilitator, I never want to be rushing. Life is so busy and hectic, and we have our good and bad days and our anxieties and stresses. So how do I center and calm myself before I go into, those kind of meetings? I'm going to share one more story. I have 3 stories that come to mind. I'm going to share 2 now and then pass it to Sheryl, and then I'll do one later. Another case that I worked on about 10 years ago, in which a young man in his 20s was killed in a drunk driving accident. And one of the person responsible was incarcerated. The family members of the deceased person wanted to meet. So I worked with these families for about 9 months before we brought them together. The actual meeting between the family member and the person incarcerated was about 2.5 hours. When we were in that meeting, both parties were so thoughtful about what they were saying. So the person incarcerated would say something. As a facilitator, it felt like minutes went by. And then the family member would say something. And then I would sit there. And if it felt like minutes would go by, and then he would say something. And in that 2.5 hour space, it felt like we were sitting in silence most of the time. When I did the follow-up with the family member, I asked her about this. And I think it's a good idea to ask participants about this in follow-up meetings. I said, when we were in that meeting and there were so many delays in the conversation, would you have wished that I would have intervened and kind of sped up the process? And she said to me, I didn't realize that there were pauses in the conversation. Because for her in that moment, they are both processing so much information and trying to think through all of this and thinking what to say, that for them, the speed was going fast. And she didn't realize there were delays in the conversation. So that was a huge lesson to me, that sometimes it's us as the facilitator that maybe wants to move the process on, but the parties are moving at the speed that is right for them. Mm. So with that, Sheryl, I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that dealing with silence piece, because there's one that comes to mind for me. This was a lower level harm situation, but one where all of the folks who were impacted had various reactions. This was 2 young men who did mailbox hockey in a neighborhood and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about when I say mailbox hockey, it's when people take a bat, they're driving a car, and they just go through and they hit the mailboxes, and to various degrees of damage in this particular neighborhood. And there was several, I believe it was like 20 something mailboxes that were damaged in this neighborhood. So when I got this case, there were many of us who worked on it, who interviewed families, and for those who came together for the group conference, we had several families come and meet with the 2 young men. They heard every single family talk about what had happened in various degrees, as I mentioned, of was it, why me? Why do you want to hurt my family? Some young children who even were like, well, why would you do this to our family? You know, and you know, parents who brought their kids because they had to see who did it and understand more. So all of that said, after these young men heard the stories, oh my gosh, it was like, for me, it might have been 5 minutes in my head, maybe 2 or 3 in actuality, but those minutes were deafening for me, and I panicked. As a young facilitator, I panicked. In my head, I was redirecting, I was making some comments in my head, I was figuring out what the strategy needed to be, and I was so afraid. I was so afraid that this was failing. And I remember at some point, one of the young men started talking and telling the story. And at the end, he gave this heartfelt apology. And then the other young man followed shortly afterward. And of course, internally, I'm breathing this sigh of relief, like, oh my gosh. But it also hit my brain. It works. It works. This is happening. This is real. This was my moment of really believing and knowing that I could trust the process. But it was the silence that taught me that. It was dealing with the silence that taught me that this can work, and it is okay. It is perfectly okay. Even if we had to sit for longer than that, it was going to be okay. But that was me seeing that play out, and I was, you know, it was just one of those moments that I replay often. I tell this story often as this message of trusting and knowing that silence is as they say, silence can be golden. So that's one story. And for me, the other point that resonated really well is the one on dealing with negative energy. Now, this case was very serious. It was a homicide where a man killed another man who was you know, it had all the elements: drugs, guns, you know, uh it, the ways that it played out with this mother who wanted answers and wanted to hear from the man who killed her son. And so in the moment where she heard the full story of what this man had, you know, he didn't reveal in court, because this happens often. We hear these cases where people are telling the story for real. And so when this happened, this woman, the gravity of hearing exactly what happened in detail was just so overwhelming for her. She came in with the mindset, I know this man did harm. And she told me up front that she forgave him. But in this moment, she wanted to take it all back. I could just tell she was so outdone. And we had scheduled a couple of days to meet with this man. Um, and this was the end of the first day. And she just looked at me like, I don't ever want to see him again. And so I didn't know which way it was going to go, but I knew for sure she didn't want to talk to him anymore that day. So we stopped. We stopped the meeting, and it was with a big question mark. And it turned out that she had time to process overnight and really come to grips with all that had happened. And the next day, she was able to shift enough to offer her forgiveness and tell him to move forward. And it was okay. She was in a better place. But all of that to say, the negative energy that she had as a facilitator, I wasn't doing her any favors by, you know, we can't force people to go places they're not ready to go. sometimes it is better to pause, to take a break, or to say, we don't know what the outcomes are going to be, and it's going to be all right. So I'll pass back to you, Joel.
As Sheryl, as you were telling that first story, I think about a slide in the training curriculum that I was trained in. And there's a slide that says, when you're in some of those meetings, count to 10 seconds in your head. And now, 15, 19 years later, 10 seems extremely short to me. It probably seemed long at one time, like I have to sit there for 10 seconds before I can say something. But 10 seconds would be the minimum now. Now, it's building that capacity just to sit in silence and be okay with it. So we are going to jump into our third video, and then we will come back to wrap up and take questions.
One case I was involved in where literally meant physically getting on. This was a homicide case. A drunk police officer at a fair, summer fair, was involved in what resulted in a hit and run death. There's a huge downpour, and everyone in the fair rushed to their cars to the parking lot. There's a long line to get out of the parking lot. This guy was drunk. He was fed up. He got in his big pickup truck and just swerved out of the line, just tore his butt out of the parking lot, right down a residential street. And within a block or two, he hit two people. One woman who was not killed, but was hurt badly. And the man, her husband, was hit more directly. And he, from all indications, died on the spot. This police officer, an ex-Marine, who was drunk, heard it on his police radio in his pickup truck that there had been this, it got on the news immediately. He heard that this had occurred. And he just sped off to get out of there. He knew it was him. And when he got home finally, he tried to kill himself with his own revolver. He was caught, he was easily identified. And I don't have time to tell the whole story, but it took many, many, many months of preparation and layers of complexity of working with two different correctional systems in different states, with a county jail, trying to negotiate the preparation process and where to hold the dialogue. And when the actual dialogue was convened, it was very moving. It was very challenging. Up to the last moment, I didn't know how it would go. It was the angriest survivor I've ever dealt with in decades. And yet I trusted my intuitive sense. Beneath words of anger and wanting to even hurt this man, like harm him verbally, I really sense the energy of compassion and a yearning for meaning in her life. And as the session began, it was very difficult. We didn't get into immediate dialogue at all. The first 45 minutes to an hour was breaking the ice. And there were, frankly, some very, if you can believe it, humorous moments in that, in a natural sense, not anyone cracking a joke. It was just things that happened, such as the lights went off in the room we're in. And I'm facilitating this in the dark. And then I realized these are motion detector lights. And so I had to use this new kind of Tai Chi movement to get my hands going up to engage the lights to get back on. But as we got into it, almost an hour, and I asked the woman who was harmed so deeply as a survivor, who lost her husband, if she wanted to take a break, if she needed to, because I knew she was a smoker and she would need to take a break at some point. And she said, fine. And she looked at me and said, Mark, when we come together, is it okay if you just sat in the other room with my friend who came with me? I really want to meet with this man. It's a cop and a cop wannabe. I want to meet myself. And my ego was, oh my God, no, I got to be here to protect these people. And that's what I would have done decades ago. And that's what I was hearing up here. That's ego, intellect stuff. But my intuitive sense was, this woman had a great deal of kindness and yearning for wellness. And I also obviously checked it out with the person who caused the harm, the cop and ex-Marine. And I said, are you sure you feel okay with this? We don't have to do this. We normally all come back together. Are you sure you're okay? And I asked him 2 or 3 times and reframed the question because I wanted to make sure he did not feel coerced or having to meet without me being present. So I went in the other room, sure got to know her support person. She didn't want her support person in the session. She wanted her to be there and to drive there with her. So I got to know her, and my ego wanted to have my ear up on the door like this, listening to what's going on, but I didn't. And about 45 minutes later, this woman whose husband was killed, who was normally very kind of like this, angry, and that kind of energy, she just walked into the room slowly and sat in the chair and just kind of took a breath and let it out. And she looked at me and she said, I can't believe what I did before I came in here. My ego said, oh God, what'd you do? But I didn't say that. And she looked at me, she said, I hugged her. He's not the animal I thought he was. He killed my Jack, but he's not an animal. I think I want my kids to meet him. So there's more I could say about that and way more that we learned from that. But my point is, that's what I mean. Sometimes it means physically getting out of the way. Now, most trainers in the field would never tell a facilitator to physically get out of the way. And I would not advise that. I'm not telling you to do it all the time, but I'm just saying, trust the strength and resilience of people. Over the years, in my personal life, family life, and in my work with highly traumatized communities and conflict zones in different parts of the world, and in many murder cases, I have learned beyond anything I could ever have conceived of the importance of honoring the strength and resilience of people who've been highly traumatized. Trauma either crushes people and puts them in a bad, dark place and difficulty to even function, or people find reservoirs of resilience and strength they never knew they had. Honor that. And they can teach us far more about life and its meaning than whatever we can offer them. And I'd like to land on that note. So good luck again on this journey.
Wow, Mark, I've heard that story a few times, and it still strikes me that that whole point about trusting in the resilience of people, that stays with me to this day. I always think about how we are much stronger than we think. The people that we're dealing with are much stronger than they may even know. And these are the moments that they're most tested, right? So that was powerful. I'm sure it was powerful to bear witness to it.
It was, and I was training in a new facilitator during that process. That added a whole nother dimension, which I can't go into. There was another case it was a homicide, death of a father. And I won't go into detail, but it's a dramatic example of taming the ego. When we walked into the prison, prisoner was already there. I walked in with this woman. She was very distressed. We sat down. She wanted to come in after he was in there already. We sat down at the table, and there was absolute silence. We sat there for minutes, and my ego was saying, I got to say something, get things moving. This is uncomfortable. And I was able to tame my ego by just taking some deep breaths. And we just sat there, and she was struggling and tearing, and she looked up at me and said, bear with me, I'm trying to find my voice. And we stayed for a couple more minutes in silence. And that lady found her voice, let me tell you. She opened up and it flowed out in such an incredible, powerful way. Again, I can't go into the full details. This is some of my writings and other videos I've done. But it was just dramatic. And that taught me a lot. And I was also training in someone there who, like myself, practices mindfulness actively. And one of the, we said that was like, I think 4 or 5 hours. We said about 20 minutes max of verbal communication, but non-verbally, we were totally present. There was a time when this women's support person was starting to speak too much, and my ego said, kind of tame that. Let's let so-and-so have her time here. I didn't. I waited. And myself and the person I was training in simultaneously, we did not practice. We both went and just gently looked at him. And the guy, he got it. We didn't have to verbally say anything. So yeah, it's really amazing. And I don't want to minimize what I'm saying about respect, the strength and resilience of people who have been harmed. Trauma is nasty stuff. And if it either crushes you and you have a hard time keeping your head above the water, so to speak, or literally you find reservoirs of strength. I mean this in other settings too, in our family setting, and many families who have severe illnesses or disabilities, of people who struggle with life.
Yeah.
And yet you find more joy in their energy and presence than you do with people who are, quote, normal and doing fine.
Yeah. I'm going to pass it to you, Joel. And I have something, I want to say something more to what Mark just said, but go ahead, Joel.
Earlier, I had referenced that I have 3 stories that come to mind. I'm glad I held on to the third one because it aligns with this piece. 2 years ago, I remember this was in 2021, I facilitated a juvenile court situation. It was low level. It was 2 students who had got into a fight at a middle school, but it did get referred to the juvenile court system. And I did the preparation meetings with the daughter and the mother and the daughter and the mother, the individual preparation meetings. When we got to the day of the conference, I brought one family into the room and I went out to the waiting room to bring the other family in. And when I opened the door and the mother and daughter came in, the 2 mothers realized that they knew each other. And we did not know this beforehand. They were both originated from a different country. They had immigrated to Fargo. And I believe their native language was French in this situation. And they knew each other from their home country from years ago. So they come into the room. I had kind of sat down at the table and they embrace each other. And I physically moved my chair away from the table because they are embracing each other. They're speaking in French. I couldn't exactly understand what they were saying, but I could feel the energy that it was good. They sit down eventually. They turn to their daughters and they are having, as 2 mothers, a heart-to-heart discussion with their 2 daughters. And this probably went on for 20 minutes or so. And I sat there, just backed away, and and I knew it was okay. I knew these 2 mothers were tending to this situation in the way that worked for them. If I would have intervened, and like I said, I have a script in my head. It's like at the start, you do this, this, this. I let that all go to the side. I'm like, if I would have interrupted, I would have interrupted such a pivotal moment for these 2 families. Eventually, after, there came to be a lull, I scooted back in and then we talked through some of the other situations and there was some paperwork we had to do and stuff like that. But it was a really beautiful moment with these 2 families where I just got to sit back and allow the 2 mothers to have this conversation with their daughters. So Sheryl, you mentioned another one too.
So I just was thinking about the trusting the resilience of people and getting out of the way, because I had a situation with a case a few years ago where the person who had caused the harm, he shot the person who had been harmed, and that person lived and wanted to share with him how they survived and thrived as a result of this. And it was her moment to say, I am not just living, but I've gone beyond what the doctor said I could do. And she did offer her forgiveness, but this man was so overwrought. I mean, he cried like, and I have seen, we see tears. We're not immune to that. But I mean, he cried like I don't think I've ever had anybody cry to the extent that he did. The person who was his support person was upset with me. I'll just be honest. The support person was upset with me because they wanted me to stop it, because they thought he was incapable of having these emotions and still being able to participate, when I knew full well that even if the, no matter what the emotional output is, unless they're like needing to be resuscitated or something major, I'm watching. I'm fully aware. And he came back to himself and he was able to continue on. But that other person was like not so sure, like this doesn't seem quite right. But once we got to the other side of that and he continued on, after it was all over, he came to me and he's like, wow, I didn't know what you were doing in there, but I got it. I figured it, he's just like, okay, I see how this works, but it is and for me, I knew that I had to stay out of the way, because it wouldn't have played out the authentic ways that it should have, had I intervened and said, oh, go take care of yourself. I'm so sorry that you're so emotional about it. No, sometimes that emotion is good. And it was as Oprah says, the ugly cry. He was extremely emotional about it, and as he should have been. So, Mark, I'm going to give you the last word here. We're winding down, so I'll let you say whatever follow-up you'd like to say before we open it up for Q&A.
There are so many examples and stories that we and others could share of this kind of dynamic, but I want to bring it into a broader perspective. I have been, because of my travels, having been invited into many different countries and some cultures, I have witnessed this in political violence and terrorism, the same dynamic. When I've been in a circle process with Israeli Jews, Palestinians on the West Bank, the occupied territory, with Catholics and Protestants and their long history of terrorism in Northern Ireland, and a number of other places. And if you had asked me about this before I ever witnessed this and was part of it, I'd say, no way. But I witnessed it. And it was, and again, it was at points where my ego was saying, oh my God, I got to say something here. And I would calm my ego, close the mouth, trust the process. And it was not just incredible what happened, it was touching, where a Palestinian young man who was listening to an Israeli mother whose son was killed by a Palestinian sniper got up and got some Kleenex and brought it over to the mother. Here in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Sheryl, you were part of one of these when I had a number of sessions with local Palestinian and Jewish leaders.
More than one.
Yeah, Twin Cities. And there were a number of sessions that really got heated, but one was so heated because the one or the other side was saying, oh, this is the way it is. And I could tell the buttons were really getting pushed. And oh God, we're not going to be meeting again. This is going to close it down. And I didn't say anything. I let it flow. Letting toxic energy discharge when people trust you as a facilitator is part of the whole healing process. It got out. And I cautiously asked at the end, folks, are you interested in meeting again, as we had talked about? They sort of cautiously said, oh yeah, I think we could try it. I wasn't sure. And I found out before we met again in my living room area that the two guys who were the most ideological and really at it, Palestinian Jew, they went out golfing together. And that to me is what I call a humanistic approach to dialogue mediation. It's like, that doesn't solve all the problems. You got to look at the more macro issues and all that. But I have more confidence in that kind of people-to-people diplomacy, humanizing the process. I have more confidence in that than in politicians. Like people I've worked with over the years, including just recently in Israel and Palestine, they're called the Parent Circle. They're bereaved parents who have had their loved ones killed by the other side. And they have come together to support each other and speak out. I literally have more confidence, even though there's only maybe 1,000 of them at this point. I have more confidence in them rebuilding their cultures stitch by stitch than political folks mouthing off all this stuff and it doesn't mean anything. They keep, well, look what's happening as we speak in Israel and Palestine.
All right. Well, we're getting some questions. So
Yes. Thank you all so much for these powerful stories and these powerful insights. Yeah, as a student, I'm just overwrought with all of these lessons. And thank you so much for all that you share. We have a couple of questions in the stream. And so we'll take these. And then if we have time, I'll have one more for you. Okay, so our first question asks, are there any special techniques for authentic communication and harnessing emotional energy in virtual environments, especially observing body language? And there's a thanks to you all for sharing your experience.
Techniques. I think I'll just kind of throw it out there. I'll say, first of all, where I work now at KIPCOR, the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, we do much of our work still process-wise virtually. And so we have learned how to do this, knowing that for a lot of people, the reason why we stayed in a virtual environment is for safety reasons. A lot of people like being in their own home, having their comfort things by them because they're having intense conversations. It feels better to them. So what I've learned to do is, technique-wise, I ask a few things of people in terms of, especially if it's confidential, like stuff, making sure that they agree they're in the room alone, and obviously if they need support or something, that's a different story. But as long as we are dealing with confidential information, I want to know that you're in a room where it's closed, you're safe, that you feel okay, that I can see you in your full screen. Like sometimes I will put people in a breakout room and just check everything first. I also do some coordination with breakout spaces because I don't believe in bringing people straight into the meeting room together. That's traumatizing to some people. So I have a way of ushering people out one at a time. I sometimes ask, just like we would in full, if we were in person, I would give choice to certain things for people. But people would be brought into spaces in a way that feels comfortable and is not a surprise. So I'll stop there. Joel and Mark, you all can feel free to jump in.
Joel, what about your experience?
I'm glad this question came up because earlier when I was talking about mindfulness and kind of prepping to go into those meetings or a phone call, I thought about the online experience with meetings now too. So just in the same way, before an in-person meeting or a phone call, I try to do that same kind of like mindfulness before I get into my Zoom setting with a family, And one thing I've learned from doing online processes is, you're prepping them for the process of restorative conferencing, but you're also prepping them to do it in an online space, and I think about little things like when we come together, it's like we're kind of disclosing our backgrounds to each other, like our home environments, and that becomes part of the preparation process. And I think as a facilitator, it makes our facial expressions all the more important because all they can see of us as a facilitator is here. So if I am like looking off to the side, if I'm looking down, checking my cell phone, or something, that is so apparent to the parties in this online space. So it challenges me in a good way to be even more present and attentive to the parties on screen. How about you, Mark?
Well, that's a really good question, by the way. When COVID came about, and I was told by people at the University of Minnesota, my courses from this point on are going to have to be taught on this thing called Zoom online, I panicked. I was ready to retire even earlier than I was planning. I was absolute total skeptic. I had been asked to do that kind of thing even before COVID. I was said, no, I want in person. I was very rigid. But I have gone from an absolute skeptic to very much like you guys are sharing that. I mean, I still like in person, but I have experienced and witnessed even more intimacy at times on Zoom because, as Sheryl was saying, many people do, safer in that territory. But there are things, Sheryl, you gave wonderful techniques of just managing it that you mentioned. But another one I found is always to be important to have some experiential stuff, not just role plays, but we'll do deep listening exercises where people share stories of woundedness within their own lives at levels they feel comfortable with. It can be a small wound, it can be a big one, but it's only something they feel safe disclosing to one person. It's not going to be, shared with everyone in the group unless they choose to do that. And I think there are techniques, and I think this is the future. I have no question. I think there's still going to be in person, but I think this is going to be far more present. I used to, before COVID, I would be traveling sometimes 11, sometimes 12 times a year, and in quite a few different countries. I haven't done any international work in person since COVID, but I've done it through Zoom in India and Brazil and a number of other places. So Zoom, I think, has tremendous possibilities, and some of the basic principles, by the way, that we were talking about apply to Zoom too. Working with breath, being mindful of our egos, being mindful if we're getting like, here's a big one we don't like to deal with and admit. Be mindful if our mind's drifting as we're on I'm not proud to say what I'm going to say, but it's real. There was this was an actual in-person preparation session I was involved in a number of years ago. And I've been in many over the years. I found myself, my mind, I was listening, I thought deeply, but my mind was drifting because it was going to be such a busy day. And thank God I was aware of that. And I went right to breath work, not like that, but deep breaths. They couldn't tell I was doing that, but I mean deep breaths. And that like reset my energy. And I felt totally present again in their story, like time stood still. So, some of the general techniques of working with breath, which I used to totally minimize a long time ago, it's powerful stuff. In related to Zoom, by the way, another area I began a little skeptical when our religious community and our meditation community, we had to do it on Zoom. I thought, oh my gosh, how can you do that? And I have learned to actually, my wife and I are on weekly Zoom sessions with our meditation group, and particularly with at times with our church group as well. And I have again found that to be, it's different, but in some ways, it's hard for me to say. I don't know if it's better, but it's different in a good way. Again, I like the in-person, but
Yeah.
It's about adjusting to culture and what's happening.
I hope we answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you all so much for those thoughtful answers. The next question that we have is one that I'm really interested in as well, because I think it's easy to take for granted just how radical a shift in doing work or being in this sort of space with each other is for some participants, right? And so when it comes to this notion of dealing with silence, do you tend to discuss the use of silence with participants prior to conferencing? In addition to that, what do you do or what do you look for to notice when someone is shutting down in the silence rather than just gathering thoughts or processing? A powerful question.
Good question.
Well, that's an excellent question. And I do not, the most I would say in the preparation is that, each of these encounters through conferences or circles has its own kind of feel. There's a lot of similarity. But in many, there are moments of silence. And if you're uncomfortable with that, and if you would prefer me as a facilitator to move things along quicker, let me know, before the session. That's one thing I do. But if we're in a session, and like some of the most powerful things I've witnessed is expressions of forgiveness when the word was never used, but the energy of forgiveness was palpable. It was powerful. And had I used the words of forgiveness in preparation, it would have diminished what happened, because forgiveness, like so many other things, has many cultural connotations to what it is or should be. Silence, if I'm counting to 10 inside, to allow some silence, and it's going on and on and on. Beyond that, I'll be very mindful of checking kind of the body language of the person and their ease, and I'll give them a little more time. And I might say something like, Sheryl, I know you're giving a lot of thought to this. Are you ready to move on a little bit more? Or do you need a little more time? Or would you prefer that we take a break? Yeah. Just break up and come back in 10 minutes, whatever you would prefer. There's no rock solid technique for something like that. It's got to be very intuitive and flow with it. But I try to, a lot of things I've shared with you here, and we've shared, I would not share with participants in a dialogue. This is for facilitators. It would actually make them nervous if they heard a lot of stuff, some of the words we're using. I've learned to trust over the years the wisdom within people who we're dealing with. If people have the courage to request a restorative encounter, they have a level of healing that's already gone on in their lives that far exceeds many of us, if not most of us.
Well, I was going to say, kind of connected to that idea of, this isn't therapy. So in a lot of ways, if someone's shutting down, I'm not worried. I know that this impacts people's mental health. And I'm also aware that if I'm working with someone who's experienced deep harm, trust and believe they're going to have a therapist, because I'm not going to be it. And I know that they're going to need that. So if someone is shutting down, it's a matter of me dealing with the silence and knowing that there's going to be a stopping point here. And I'm checking in and knowing that they need to check in. They need to check in with the person that's helping them to move forward with their mental health, because my job is to make sure that they're safe within that dialogue. And my job stops when I know that they've got to do some more processing that is about their healing journey that isn't this. And so there are some delineations here, and I think they're fairly clear. I don't think that, and I don't think you can do harm if someone is shutting down, because the thing to do is to stop it at that point if someone is shutting down. So no harm there.
Sheryl, you say that so articulately. That is so key. Restorative dialogue in its different forms is one of the most therapeutic interventions imaginable, but it is not psychotherapy. It is not. Creating a safe place where people feel okay to just allow their inner pains to come out, the story to come out. That's just good, healthy communication. Probing on it, asking a lot of questions or linking it to early childhood behavior or whatever, you're deep in the area of therapy. Different things. Yes.
Yeah. Joel, you got some thoughts?
No, I love both of your responses. I was just trying to think, like, do I explicitly talk to parties about the silence? And I think in some ways I do. I know I for sure talk with them about emotion. Like, how do they feel about emotion? Is this going to be an emotional process? How do they feel about crying? Because some people have really strong feelings about some of those things, like they don't want to cry in this process, or they, whatever it might be. So I think in ways I try to be as in sync with the parties as possible. And kind of, Mark, I think you said this, but I know I have talked with parties, like, if we're in that meeting and something's not feeling right, I want you to look at me, make eye contact with me. If you're not comfortable explicitly saying it, and we will take a timeout, we'll take a break, whatever it might be. So just, being in sync with each other.
I think this is where, we talk about preparation. Okay, so if you are involved with someone who has been in a deep harm situation, like homicide, or they've been harmed by someone in a way that it's a deep harm, you're going to have been with them for months. You're going to have had many meetings with this person. So you're going to learn each other. They're going to learn how to trust you. You're going to learn how to read them. And then you're going to know already, oh, no, this is them shutting down. This is them being contemplative. This is them, whatever the situation is, you're going to learn how to read them over time. And so I want, as facilitators, you need to trust yourself that this is theoretical. We're talking about this in very hypothetical situations. But when you get in relationship with the people that you are working with, you're going to learn their ways. And so it won't be like mystery, a big mystery when they're in dialogue, because you're going to have already experienced that on a certain level. Now, granted, you're going to experience it on the highest possible level because they're going to be facing the person that harmed them, but you're going to know them to a certain extent, and you will have tested some things. And if you're like me, you're going to even say some of the things to them in times when you're meeting with them individually to prepare them that this might be something that's said, or this might be a reaction you might get, because you're going to want them to be fully ready for that meeting. So trust yourself that you will know the ways that a person is responding to know how to intervene or not.
Some of the examples that we're giving today are, criminal justice cases, high-level cases, but everything that just Sheryl said and other is true for people that do facilitation in school systems. I mean, if I'm sitting down with a sixth grade student and that got into an altercation, I am doing the same thing. I may be not with them for 6 months, that long. My meetings might be shorter because conferencing in schools goes usually much faster, but it's those same being in rhythm with the student. So I just wanted to mention that for those, listening in who are in K-12 education or higher education that do facilitating, these same principles are applicable to that process as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you all for that. I think we have time for one more question. And so I'm going to combine two questions that we have in the chat around sort of going in the opposite direction, right, of silence. When are those moments as a facilitator when you feel you must say something? When do you feel like, what are the circumstances where you feel you have to lean in? Are there moments? Yeah.
I can think of a case where things got so hostile where I had to literally intervene and say, Mr. Smith, I know you're really upset about this, but Alan, what are your thoughts on this? It's like redirecting the energy. And there's other times when it got so, this has rarely occurred, but I remember these cases. I can think of a case where folks, we need a break. Things are, we got to get a little distance here so you have time to think about this, and I need to check in with each of you individually, and then we can come back together. There's different techniques like that, but it's basically a way of trying to shift the energy, bring something in that redirects the energy.
Mm-hmm. There are definite times as a facilitator where you have to guide the conversation in that way. I mean, I'm watching for nonverbal cues. Like if I'm working with two students and one student says something and the other one rolls their eye, I'm going to intervene by maybe asking a question. I think kind of what Mark just said, it's like, I noticed you rolled your eye when the other student said that. Can you tell me a little more about that? I mean, maybe they just had a twitch in their eye, but maybe it meant something, So it's like I try to invite kind of like the curiosity, like tell me more about that without making implications, because maybe what I witnessed was not accurate, but to have them kind of explain. And in a lot of situations with in K-12 education or even like juvenile court cases, you do, as the facilitator, have to guide the conversation. They're not necessarily just used to having an ongoing conversation with each other. So it's like sometimes it is about asking a question and then reframing it, or helping with it, but that you're doing it at the level that's needed and allowing dialogue to happen without you as much as possible, but being there.
Yeah.
I allow a lot. I allow a lot because I really want it to be as authentic as possible. So short of, I will definitely look at folks to observe body language to determine if someone's crossed a line. And Mark said a lot about, leaning in and, doing some things non-verbally that might get people to lower the temperature. But ultimately, if people are okay with something, you see them kind of be okay. Their own body language is calmer. Obviously, if people are leaning forward and their words are becoming more vehement, and when I say crossing lines, you can tell when someone's offended versus I know you're upset, but you just called me out of my name. If someone says something that is crossing a line, I am going to stop and take a break. Just end of story. And I've had those situations online where I've had to put people in breakouts quickly. And I've told them in advance, if it gets to this level, I'm immediately going to put you in breakout rooms and I'm going to check in.
Sheryl, that makes me think of a case. This was an in-person where it was getting out of line. It was getting so angry, and I intervened. I said, folks, I think we need to deal with this in a different way. There's a number of choices. We could end this right now and refer it back. We seemed locked into this dynamic. We could take a break and come back in 10 minutes. Or there might be some other choices. What are your thoughts about this? And they kind of looked at each other and they agreed to take a break for 10 minutes. And I made it clear, and during the 10 minutes, I would be meeting with each of you to kind of get a better sense of what's going on in your needs. And they wanted to come back together. But that was very critical, the way I did it that way, as opposed to saying, just unilaterally say, okay, we need to end it, or just refer it back to the courts. But I would have, if they said, no, I don't think we should go any further, I would have honored that.
Yeah, it's really it's rare for me to have those situations, though, I'll be honest. Like I said, I allow a lot, and I believe I've learned to read people well enough to know whether they're truly okay. But yeah, there've been some circumstances where I've had to put people in breakouts. I'm not gonna lie. But you learn, but they have also been warned, like, if this happens, this is the possibility. And I love the idea, Mark, and I will steal that, of giving people choices. So yeah,
it's basically giving them exit choices, whatever they want.
yeah.
But leaving this on a positive note, what to me is amazing as a practitioner and as a scholar, how rare this stuff occurs, like what we're talking about. It really, I mean, when it occurs, you remember it because it usually is pretty dramatic. But I'm shocked after 40 years of practice in RJ here and other countries, there are some awful stories of things that have happened. It is hard to find powerful literature even, or speakers that are deeply, deeply critical of RJ. You can find a few, but unless you know some stuff that I don't know, it's like there's a quality about RJ that I think cuts way beyond the liberal and conservative stuff and gets more to a more real sense of justice.
Thank you each so much for, again, honoring us with your time, your energy, your stories. I know there were a few questions that we couldn't quite get to, but to, again, honoring your time, we're going to go ahead and close now. Before we bring Aaron back on, I just want to make sure that there isn't any sort of last lingering thing any of you want to share. I think, Mark, that is a beautiful note on which to end, but just want to make sure there's nothing else to say. All right.
Good.
Well, beautiful. Thank you again so much for showing up. And thank you all for coming and offering your questions and your thoughts. Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you for just a few last minute announcements. Thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much to Sheryl, Jill, and Mark for sharing your richly insightful stories and experiences with us, and also to you, Des Moines, for guiding the conversation. Before we close, here's an announcement about our upcoming webinar. You're invited to join us again on November 15th, another Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, discussing restorative justice in education for diverse learners, with guests Jessica Gonzalez, Chelsea Kovacs, and Lisa Shaw, and host Tarek Masrani. They will be discussing how restorative practitioners can better attend to the needs of diverse learners, including students with disabilities and English language learners in the classroom, working on identifying restorative applications for supporting these students and their families, and accommodating differences when circle keeping. They'll be offering us some methods for removing barriers to participation for these students, and it will most surely be a very enriching conversation. You are also encouraged to check out our website for our archive of other webinars from the past 11 years, and to keep up to date about events going on at the Zare Institute and some resources. We welcome your partnership in the work that we do and are incredibly grateful for your continued support. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and thank you.